AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Asynchronous means that your browser can communicate with the server in the background, creating smoother user experiences. While XML was originally part of AJAX, it is no longer a requirement and has largely been replaced by JSON due to its simplicity and ease of use, although, as you'll see shortly, it can handle just about any data format. In these 3 lines we have enough code to fetch the data from its source and display it within our browser. The first line, which initiates the API call, takes a parameter representing the location of the data source. In this case, we're retrieving data from a simple text file. The second line receives the response from the server and interprets it as a text object using the response.text method. The third and final line assigns the response data to a variable and prints it to the browser's console using console.log. I've wrapped our example in basic HTML to make it W3C compliant, ensuring it will display consistently across browsers. Let's add some text to the file for our script to fetch. Although there's no visible content, we can use the console to verify data and debug before rendering it on the page. In our next example, we're going to render our response directly on the page by inserting it into a div using JavaScript. Instead of just logging it to the console, we'll dynamically update the page with our fetched data. Firstly, we see everything's working as expected. When the page loads, the fetch function retrieves the data from our JSON file and inserts the message into our web page. To check the request was successful, we use the response.ok. If it is true, the code proceeds to convert the response to JSON, which we then use to display the data on the page. This line takes the message property from the JSON response and displays it inside the div with the ID myDynamicData. Now let's see what happens when the JSON file is incorrect or missing the message property. In this case, I've edited the file and mistyped the property name. When the code tries to access data.message, it can't find the correct key, so it fails back to the default message, no message found. This line checks if we received a response with data.message. If we did, it displays that message. If not, it shows the default message, no message found, indicating that the message key was not present in the response. For our last error condition, I've introduced a syntax error by removing one of the curly braces from the JSON file, breaking the JSON structure. When the fetch operation tries to parse this, it throws an error, and this is where our error handling comes in. In the catch block, we capture the error and display a user-friendly message on the web page. At the same time, the error is logged in the browser console for debugging. This way, we make sure that users see a meaningful message when something goes wrong, instead of the page crashing or showing some technical error. Now, let's move on to a real-world example using an actual API. In this code, we're fetching a random cat fact from the cat fact API and displaying it on the page. Let's walk through the code. First, we have the div as before with the ID catFact, which is where the fetched catFact will be displayed. The fetch catFact function sends a request to the API's URL. When the response comes back, we use this line to convert it to JSON, as the API sends the fact in this format. Once the data is ready, we use this line to display the new catFact in the div. In case something goes wrong, we've included some basic error handling using the catch block. It logs any errors to the console with a message, so you can see what went wrong without interrupting the user experience. Since this is a fun, simple example, this level of error checking is enough. To make things interesting, we've added the setInterval line, which calls the fetch catFact function every 3 seconds, keeping the content fresh without the user needing to refresh the page. Lastly, we call the fetch catFact once the page loads to display an initial catFact right away, due to the first interval starting after 3 seconds. No catFact tutorial would be complete without some imagery, so in this example we're pulling data from 2 separate API sources, one for the catFacts and the other for the cat images. This way we'll get a fresh catFact and a new cat image on the page every 3 seconds. Now that you've seen the cats, let's see how we get them. For the HTML structure, we have a container div for the ID catFact container, which holds both an image and the fact. The image has an ID cat image and starts off empty, and below it is a div for the catFact with a default loading message, loading catFact. There's also some basic CSS to center the content, style the image, and give the text a nice readable format. For the script, the fetch catFact function is responsible for pulling a random catFact from the catFact API, catFact Ninja, as before. After we get the response, we convert it to JSON with response.json. Once we have the data, we insert the catFact into the div with the catFact ID catFact using the getElementById function. We've also included the basic error handling if something goes wrong. The additional feature is fetching the cat image using the fetchCatImage function. This handles the fetching of the cat images. The cat API returns an array with image data. We grab the URL of the first image using data in square brackets 0. We then update the source attribute of the image tag with the ID cat image to display the new image on the page. Again, we've included some basic error handling in case the image fails to load. The update cat content function combines both the cat fact and the image fetching functions. Every time it runs, it updates both the cat fact and the image, keeping the content dynamic and fresh. And, like the previous example, we make it interactive by adding the setInterval command, which triggers the update cat content every 3 seconds. And finally, we also call the update cat content immediately on the page so that users don't have to wait for the first update and get an initial cat fact and image straight away. I hope you found this tutorial useful, and if you could, please subscribe and like to help me grow the channel. Thanks all!